Okay, I think we can start. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's lecture of the British Institute for Libyan and Northern African Studies. It is with great pleasure that I introducing you tonight's speaker, Dr. Rossella Pansini, who is currently working as a postdoc and research assistant at the University of Siena. And Siena is the place where Rossella did her BA and master's degrees before going on and undertaking a PhD study with the University of Pisa. She is a classical archaeologist, and her main research interests concern ancient construction, from architectural stratigraphy, building techniques and technologies, and the analysis of architectural design. She's been involved in a range of fieldwork projects in Italy, Greece, and Morocco, and I'm pleased to say that we collaborated on many of those projects. She has been developing skills in topographic surveying, GIS, photogrammetry, and 3D digital reconstruction. And all of these skills she has successfully applied to some of her recent research. She has published a range of papers on these topics, including an edited special section in the international journal Archeologia e Calcolatori, which collects a series of papers that look at systems and technologies of documentation and management of historical architecture. She recently published a book on the topic that she will present on tonight, and the title of the talk is The Forum of Sala, Architectural Evolution of a North African Town Across the Pre-Roman and Roman Eras. And we're all looking forward to hearing about this important study. So without further ado, I will pass it over to you, Rossella. But before I do that, actually, I would like to remind our audience that this talk is being recorded and it will be available to watch on YouTube, our YouTube channel. So anyone who missed tonight's talk can easily do that via YouTube. And after the talk, there will be a Q&A session with the audience. If anyone has any question, I'm sure Rossella will be delighted to answer your question. So please type in your question in the Q&A box, which you should find at the bottom of your screen. And I will be pleased to read your question to Rossella. So now really, without any further ado, Rossella, it's all over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So good afternoon to everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me. As Nicola said, I am Rossella Pansini, and I'm a research assistant and a postdoc at the University of Siena. And today I am going to talk about my book, which came from a part of my PhD thesis concerning the archaeological site of Sala, and in particular, the Roman era buildings in the monumental district. First of all, I would like to give you an introduction to the archaeological site. Sala is located in the territory of present-day Morocco, near the southern border of the Roman province of Mauretania Tingitana, which was created around 4042 AD by Emperor Claudius. Today, Sala is approximately 3.5 kilometers from the estuary of the Bouegreg River, near the Bab Zaher gate of the walls of Rabat, the capital of Morocco. Ancient sources mentioned in Sala are not many and give us little information about its organization, The first one is Pomponius Mela, the Chorographia, that mentions Sala among the wealthy cities of Mauritania, along with Gilda, Volubilis, Prisciana, and Lixus. Pliny the elder also mentioned Sala, describing it as an oppidum that would have taken its name from the river Salat, the today's Buregreg, that was located in an area close to the deserts and infested with herds of elephants, and inhabited by the local peoples named Autololis. Other sources are Claudius Ptolemeus, who first gives the astronomical position of the city, while the Itinerarium Antonini, as well as the Anonymous Ravennatis, instead provide the name of the settlement as Sala Colonia, and placing it between Camusida and Exploratio ad Mercurius. The settlement that can be seen today covers an area of approximately 1.5 hectares and lies along the western slope of a hill. Within the town, evidence from different eras coexist. The town wall, dating from the Marinid period, surrounds both the remains of a monumental necropolis, contemporary with the walls, and also the remains of the ancient center, dating from pre-Roman and Roman times. The conformation of the terrain influenced the organization of the settlement, which develops on terraces sloping down towards the valley of the Buregreg River, where the city's ancient port must have been located. The remains of the ancient center, include mainly buildings of public, religious, and commercial function, or all organized around a large paved area. Among these buildings, we can find some of them that were dated to pre-Roman times by prior research, such as the Western Building, Building D, and Temples B and C, and others that were dated to the Roman Empire, the Capitolium, the Arch, and the building with the nymphium. A possibly commercial district with rectangular rooms called Complex G rises immediately north of the Capitolium and is flanked to the west by a craft district. To the south of the large paved area, there is also a bath complex built, which is dated to Roman times, but it's built on more ancient structures. And to the east of it, below the paved square, a series of rooms which may be interpreted as taberne and are part of a three-terrace complex called complex of Temple A, which is the one that I will discuss today. The area surrounding Sala also hosts some necropolis located to the north, the south, and the west of the city walls. The particular conformation of the terrain determined that the city developed, as I said, on sloping terraces with buildings that exploited its characteristics and constituted peculiar and therefore particularly interesting architectural types. The approach to the study was a combination of traditional methods together with the application of technologies that were used for the documentation, management, and reconstruction. In general, the approach involved the collection of all available data from previous investigations carried out at the archaeological site, the collection of new data from fieldwork in which the principles of building archaeology were applied, a new topographic and photogrammetric survey of buildings. All this data was then collected, organized, and managed through a DBMS, database management system, and entered into a GIS system. Finally, the process of analyzing and interpreting the data led to the creation of reconstructive proposals in 2D and 3D for the best preserved buildings. The city and its surrounding area have been the subject of archaeological research since the beginning of the 20th century. Initially, archaeologists' attention focused on the necropolis that are located outside the city walls. The first excavations inside the city walls were those carried out by Jules Borelli and the Egyptian princess Khadija Fouad. After them, there were some other investigations that didn't involve excavations, and a new long phase of excavation started in 1958 by Jean Boub. Borelli and Fouad excavated a large part of the settlement, dealing mainly with buildings from the Middle Ages, but also with other more ancient structures. Unfortunately, they never published detailed accounts of these activities. The other great protagonist, as I said, of the Sala excavations was Jean Boub, to whom we owe the unearthing of all the other buildings that we see on the site today. His activity was very long. He excavated in Sala between 1958 and 1996. But his activities led to some scientific publications, but never to a comprehensive publication on his discoveries. The things that we have are some photographs of these activities taken during the excavations by Jules Borelli and Jean Boub, which are preserved in Rabat, in the Photothèque de la Division du Patrimoine Culturel, and in Aix-en-Provence, in the photo library of the Centre Camille Julien. And these are two examples of the archival documentation available on the Sala excavation. The first here is a photograph from the excavation of 1929-1930, and the second of the excavation of the 60s. The field documentation involved the application of the principles of building archaeology, and thus the identification of stratigraphical units and the construction history of the buildings in the area. And in parallel with it, 3D photogrammetric surveys were also carried out for all the buildings of the area. These 3D models were used in various ways. They served as the basis for data input on the GIS platform, but also for the drawing of the stratigraphic units, both in 2D and 3D. And finally, they were a verification tool for the proposed 3D reconstructions of the buildings. The database on which I stored all the information works by correlated tables with a not particularly complex setup, and was then linked to a GIS platform, which contains digitization of the various stratigraphic units and all their attributes. And this is a general view of the 3D GIS platform. Finally, however, I didn't want to leave out the more traditional approaches. So I also wanted, for the sake of clarity of documentation, to report all the units in 2D. And here you can see an example. Finally, as I anticipated, the 3D models were also a testing ground for the reconstructive hypothesis I made for the buildings in the area. Obviously, these hypotheses are based on the combination of various pieces of information, which come from previous data, stratigraphic analysis, and structural analysis. I would like to emphasize that these reconstructions always remain hypothetical and only concern the best preserved and documented structures. So the area that I investigated does not comprise the entire archaeological site, but a portion of it, which includes the central paved area and the buildings around it. It is approximately 5,000 square meters in size and includes 8 buildings. Of these, some are more problematic because they have undergone very invasive restoration that use techniques that imitate ancient ones, while others are better preserved. And one of the best preserved buildings is the Temple A complex, which I will discuss today. So the Temple A complex is located at the northeastern end of the monumental area and is articulated on 3 terraces, as you can see from the photo here. The first terrace, the highest, the number 1 in this image, has 5 celle and a pronaos, and that are traditionally known as the actual Temple A. 4 of the 5 celle of the temple are subdivided into 2 rooms, while in one of them there are the remains of an apse in square stone blocks. The intermediate terrace, number 2, is about 2.7 meters lower and is bordered by the wall of the pronaos, built in opus africanum with elements of reuse and characterized by the presence of 5 pillars arranged in axis with the large block pillars of the wall. This terrace is a large trapezoidal paved area that from previous research was referred to as the forum of the city, and is accessible on the western side by the so-called Decumanus Maximus, large paved area, the central large paved area, and on the eastern side by a secondary Decumanus via 2 concrete platforms. On the western side, the area also contains the remains of 2 rooms, while at the east and west ends of the podium are the remains of 2 staircases, which allowed access to the temple cella. On the north side of the square, there is also a room that opens in the thickness of the podium wall, creating a recess, while an underground structure pertaining to a phase preceding that of the square is located at the eastern end of it. The lower terrace, on the other hand, hosts some rooms with a rectangular plan on the south and part of the western side of the complex that traditionally are identified as taberne. So the excavation of Temple A complex is due to Jean Boub, who investigated it between 1958 and 1965. As previously mentioned, the results of the excavations were never published in detail, but can be reconstructed thanks to some reports published in specialized journals. Of particular importance are the excavations carried out between 1958 and 1960, which investigated the areas of the middle terrace, revealing the stratigraphy underneath the pavement, and those of the upper terrace, leading to the discovery of the temple. The excavation below the southern portion of the paved area led to the discovery of the layers prior to its construction, comprising a building in large square blocks dated between the 2nd and the 1st century BC, that was later obliterated by a second building with stone foundation and mud brick walls from the 1st century BC. Jean Boub, on the basis of the excavation data, gave a dating to the paved area to the Trajan era. He also stated that this area would have been used as a public space until the 4th or the 5th century AD. And evidence of this is the fact that it hosts dedicatory inscription to Constantine I and possibly Constantine II. By the 5th century, the paved area would have become a dump and remained so until medieval times, during which it would have housed small pisé structures and silos excavated in the pavement. During the excavations conducted in 1960, 2 Ionic half-column capitals, a single drum of a half-column shaft, and 8 blocks with an Egyptian gorge cornice were found, referable, according to Boub, to the decoration of the facade of the temple building. The actual temple was dated to the 1st century BC on the basis of the building technique and related stratigraphy. The layers excavated inside the Chellah dated to the 4th century. Excavated inside the Chellah, 3 marble statues were found, 2 of them representing male figures. One of them was then identified as a portrait of the ruler Ptolemy of Mauritania, the last king of the reign of Mauritania. The discovery of these statues inside the Chellah led Jean Boub to hypothesize that the structure was consecrated to the cult of the Mauritanian sovereigns, and that this cult continued until late in the period, only to be supplanted by the advent of the Christian faith. For the excavation of the Taberne, I didn't find any documentation or photo, but I can tell you that the lower terrace were investigated. The lower terrace was investigated in 1965. The only available information on this operation concerned room 21, which is this, located below the western gate of the square and built entirely of large square blocks. In it, Boub detected stratigraphy that would date the construction to the pre-Roman period. According to him, the room was reused and then integrated in the next phase, which included the construction of the square and the shafts below, and was frequented until the 4th or 5th century AD. All these dating by Boub were then called into question by Maurice Elzenat and Gilbert Allier, because according to these 2 researchers, in fact, the temple complex would not be the product of several building phases, but a single construction operation dating between the end of the 1st and the beginning of the 2nd century AD, coinciding with a renovation phase of the entire monumental center that also led to the construction of the Capitolium. Actually, the building analysis revealed that the complex of Temple A is the result of a series of modifications and transformations over time, and not the product of a single construction project. In my analysis, 5 building phases were noted. This is the first one that comprises the construction of the 3 western celle of the Temple A. In particular, the dating was made because of the building techniques and the lack of mortar in the masonry. That indicates that this phase is to be dated to the pre-Roman period, because the adoption of mortar in masonry, in fact, is recorded starting from the annexation of the territory to the empire, which took place under the Emperor Claudius. and is linked to the transmission of new technology by means of the army. Oh, sorry. The second phase includes the expansion of the temple from 3 to 5 celle. Due to the similarity in construction techniques, I have also attributed 2 other rooms to this phase, which are located at a much lower elevation and probably constitute what is still visible of the structures excavated by Boob below the paved square. The conformation of the celle on the upper terrace and the difference in height with those on the middle terrace leads to the hypothesis that the temple was equipped with a pronaos on a podium from the earlier stages of its existence. However, no trace of it remains either on the ground or in the survey made during the excavations, and the connection between the temple and the structures below remains completely unknown. From Boob's excavations, in fact, it is not possible to understand whether the 2 complexes, the 2 areas, were connected by an earlier square. The third phase includes a large transformation with the construction of the paved square, dated by Boob between the end of the 1st and the beginning of the 2nd century AD. According to wall stratigraphy, the complex of the taberne on the lower terrace is also to be placed in this phase. Phase 4 includes the reconstruction of a pillar and the construction of the 2 staircases that allowed access from the square to the temple and of an altar. And phase 5 includes the construction of another structure, probably another altar, which determines the partial cutting of the eastern staircase. So starting from the archaeological plan through a process of regularization and reconstruction of the incompletely preserved evidence, a reconstructive plan of the building in phase 4 was drawn up. The presence of a portico along the sides of the square can be assumed thanks to the surveys made during the excavation by Gilbert Allier, which also portray part of the negative traces. The image is not very clear, actually. Negative traces of the paving of the southern portion of the area, which can no longer be observed today. They show that the pavement had a different orientation to that of the slabs on the square, compatible with the presence of a portico area. The complex comprises an area of 43.6 per 37.3 meters, developed as it is today on 3 terraces. The intermediate terrace must also have extended above the taberne, located on the lower level towards the south, whose vaults served as substructures. We can hypothesize that the interventions of phases 3 and 4 were indeed intended to create a unified and organic complex centered on the preservation of the earlier temple building. The temple is distinguished from later structures not only by its building technique, but also because it has some peculiarities that testify for the use of the local unit of measure, the punic cubit. In particular, the thickness of the measuring testifies to the use of the local unit of measure. The perimeters of the structures all have an average measure of 51.6 centimeter, corresponding to 1 cubit, with the exception of the back wall, which has an average measurement of 2 cubits, and the eastern perimeter of room 3, this one, which measures 1.25 cubits. The Roman era complex is thus set on an already existing structure, which forms the basis on which the construction project is realized. This seems to have been elaborated with an integration in correspondence between the traditional Roman and Punic units of measure, the pes monetalis and the cubitus strutorius, the Punic cubit. Specifically using a module corresponding to 7 Roman feet, equivalent to 4 Punic cubits. This correspondence is significant and is part of a phenomenon that was already observed in African provincial architecture. For example, Giovanni Joppolo, in his studies on Leptis Magna, postulated the coexistence of such a building module in the design and construction of some Roman buildings of the site. And in particular, he identified the use of the cubit for the construction of the stone blocks, especially in relation to their thickness, and the Roman foot for the design of the plan of the structures. However, and numerous subsequent studies have shown the same correspondence, that the same correspondence was also used in the plan design of many buildings projects in Roman era North Africa. The equivalence identified is almost perfect, as 2.07 meters corresponds to 7 Roman feet and the 2.06 meters to 4 Punic cubits. So this same phenomenon applies to the Roman phase of Temple A in Sala. The length of the temple, including the Chellah and the pronaos, which, as explained before, must have existed since pre-Roman times, corresponds to 7 modules. This measure is used for the construction of the square, up to and including the space above the walls of the Taberne. And the reconstructed length corresponds to 98 feet and 56 cubits. On the other hand, the width of the complex seems to be established on the basis of the temple and the stairs on the eastern side of the celle, corresponding to 12 modules. The construction of a trapezoidal-shaped square is perhaps to be justified by the presence of previous structures in the subsoil and the conformation of the hillside, which conditioned the design and thus prevented the development of a geometrically more regular layout. The reconstruction of the elevation of Temple A complex in phase 4 was based on both the masonry still observable in situ and the elements of architectural decoration referable to the structure. So the reconstruction of the facade of Temple A was based on information from Jarnbourg's excavation, which included 2 Ionic half-column capitals, a single drum of a half-column shaft, and 8 blocks with an Egyptian gorge cornice. The height of the half columns was calculated from the preserved diameters of the shaft and capital, corresponding to 51.4 centimeters, so 1 cubit, and 48 centimeters, respectively. In the absence of any available data from the local architecture of this period, the reconstruction had to apply the Vitruvian canons, which prescribe a ratio of 1/10 between the diameter of the shaft and the total height of the Ionic column. So in this case, the height would be 5.14 meters, so 10 cubits. A smooth frieze joint to the cornice was placed above the half columns, and the roof above the celle was probably constituted by a flat terrace, which is considered a typical component of the sacred architecture of this period, as suggested by iconographic evidence of temples with this layout depicted on Mauritanian coins. And the resulting total elevation of the temple and the pronaos is 9.24 meters, corresponding to 18 Punic cubits. As for the entrance to the sanctuary, given the presence of concrete platforms at the limits of the piazza, and in correspondence with the roads access to the east and the west, it may be assumed that they were adorned with monumental arched entrance. To the south of the entrance from the large paved area, it is also possible to hypothesize the presence whose walls are in continuity with the end walls of the floor. Study of the buildings in the monumental center also led to a hypothesis on the development of the townscape. The earliest building activities in Salah civic district date back to the Mauritanian period. They might have taken place throughout the 1st century BC, although a more precise dating is impossible to determine. All the buildings belonging to this phase have compatible orientations and are located at the east and west ends of the excavated area, which we can imagine as a large open space. This period can be divided into two subphases. This is the image of the first subphase that includes the original structure of Temple A, which was formed by 3 cellae. To the second subphase have been attributed the enlargement of this building, which became a 5 cellae temple, and the buildings located to the south of it, below the intermediate terrace, which are no longer visible because they were reburied after the excavations. The western end of this area, the construction of a water storage here underneath the building with nymphium, of which only scant traces of measuring square blocks remain, can also be attributed to this phase. The transition to the Roman imperial period shows a progressive monumentalization of the area. It seems clear that the conformation of the terrain had a strong influence on the construction of buildings, which were built with divergent orientations, and their layout was affected by the hill slope. This is the first subphase of the Roman period that can be dated towards the end of the 1st and the beginning of the 2nd century AD, and includes the construction of the new monumental complex enclosing Temple A. These operations determined the disappearance of some of the earlier buildings. The structures on the south side of the temple were obliterated under an earth fill during the construction of the paved square above them. And given the presence of lime mortar in the masonry, the construction of temples B and C that were dated by previous research to the pre-Roman times may also date to this phase. A first monumentalization of the building with nymphium can be attributed to this period too. This is shown by the construction of a podium made of square blocks with a molded cornice, of which only a few courses remain. The second subphase is associated with the construction of the Capitolium, the western building, and the building with nymphium. While the third phase includes the construction of the arch, to be placed not earlier than the second half of the 2nd century AD, on the basis of the studies by my colleagues and friends Nicolò Mugnai on the architectural decoration, and by Stefano Camporeale on the construction, history, decoration, and design of the structure. The position and orientation of the arch, which is inconsistent with the buildings located immediately around it, must perhaps be justified by a design intent aimed at constructing a sort of monumental backdrop for the area. The arch to the west and the monumental entrance to the terrace of Temple A to east constitute in this arrangement the two extreme points of the area, which can be identified as the actual forum of the city. On the basis of the traces and the few remaining masonries, we can outline a very poor and partial picture of the evolution of the district in the medieval period. The determination of the interventions is in fact complicated by the excavations carried out in the area, which destroyed most of the later structures. We know that in the medieval period, Chellah was provided with an oratory, city wall, and a sacred enclosure housing the royal necropolis of Sultan Abu Hassan, a mosque, and a Quranic school. In the area of the ancient monumental center, the Capitolium changed its use to house a dwelling, while the area of Temple A appears to be used as a dump, and the building with the nympheum is transformed into an oratory. So, a final remark concerning the last Roman era subphase. What emerges from the analysis and also at first glance is a disorderly layout. The urban layout of the Forum of Sala does not appear to be the result of a well-defined program aimed at regularizing spaces. However, the importance of the central paved area and its centrality to the organization of the district is clearly evident. The lack of a geometrically regular organization is, in all probability, the result of the gradual growth of the monumental center and its adaptation to the conformation of the terrain. If we observe the situation from a 3D point of view, we could find another aspect to consider, which is the importance of monumentality. So in ancient society, architectural form was a visual means of communication. The scenographic intent pursued by ancient planners is perceptible when considering the building methods adopted in Sala, with buildings that are articulated on terraces that exploit the slopes and show intentions that go beyond mere functionality, aiming at the expression of monumentality. While it is not possible to discern a desire to regularize the layout of the monumental center in the 2nd century AD from a planimetric point of view, we can perhaps recognize an attempt to harmonize space based on the visual impact of the monuments on the viewer. In this view, the arch and the entrance to the temple in front of it at the opposite ends of the paved area constitute the two extremes of the area. The arch constitutes not only the entrance, but also the monumental backdrop of this district. From under the archways, the spectator finds himself in a visual corridor, which focuses the view on the entrance to the temple, which is one of the the oldest buildings in the settlement and is dedicated to the kings of Mauritania. So it would be very important for the local community. On the opposite side, the arch monumentally closes the quarter and somewhat completes the area, which is already adorned on sides by buildings with pilasters and semi-columns on their facades, which are the Capitolium and the building with the nympheum. This is an aspect that seems particularly interesting to me, and I hope to be able to explore it further in the future. I will stop here. I hope you found this talk interesting. Thank you very much for your attention, and thanks again to the organizers for this opportunity.
Well, thank you very much, Rossella, for this thorough presentation of your work, your proposed reconstructions, and some broader assessments of the importance of Sala Civic District. We now have time for questions. And for those of you who joined late, if you have a question, I'd appreciate if you could type the question in the Q&A box, and I will read your question to Rossella. Yeah, so I mean, as you know, I'm really fascinated by the importance of your work and also the comprehensive approach that you adopted in your study, which involved not only the study of the archaeological remains, but also the examination of materials which are not available as, published materials, but they are held in different archival collections. And this is to remark once again the importance of assessing archival collections because they are really an important source of information for our archaeological studies. I think personally it would be impossible to do a full archaeological study without taking into account these resources. There are, I think, many elements of your reconstruction that are quite intriguing and that they point to some of the specificities of the local architecture and urbanism, which find, we can say, almost no parallels elsewhere in the Roman provinces. One thing I was wondering about in the first Roman subphase that you identify, essentially, if I understand it correctly, during that first phase, we don't see any traces of the staircases which may have connected the pronaos of Temple A with the plaza underneath. Is that correct?
Yes, it is actually, because these staircases are constructed over the pavement, over the slabs of the pavement. So they must be of a later phase. So we actually don't know how the piazza, the actual piazza and the temple were connected in the first Roman subphase. Actually, maybe there was another staircase, but we have no trace of it, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I mean, do you think it would be possible that there was no connection at all between the temple and the plaza in front of it? Do you think
I
there
don't
would
know.
be?
I think that this is a complex that is very um, organic. So it seems very organic. It seems built to preserve the ancient temple and to be connected to the ancient temple. So I find it difficult to imagine two areas that are completely separated, are not linked one to the other. So I think that most probably there were other two staircases or another staircase I don't know, that connected the piazza and the temple. But I couldn't find any trace of it, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's true, because we only see the traces of later staircases.
Yes, of phase four, say
Yeah,
phase four, which is not the first phase,
yeah,
which is not the phase of the Great Reconstruction.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, if one looks in detail at the archaeological evidence preserved and the hypothesis of reconstruction, obviously there are many oddities about this project, not because of your reconstructions, but because of the nature of the building itself. Uh, I mean, I'm thinking in particular about the question of whether there was an independent colonnade on the front of it, or whether we should just imagine a building provided just with half columns attached to the walls of the Chellah. So that is also another interesting question, but unfortunately, as far as I know, there is no preserved evidence that can
No, there's no
clarify.
trace of this.
Mm,
So I chose not to reconstruct a colonnade in front of the temple because I didn't have any archaeological evidence of it.
yeah. And also you mentioned, of course, the importance of assessing iconographic sources.
Yes.
And we do have some representations of so-called Mauritanian temples on coins of the period between the second and the first century BC, which seem to point actually to that kind of solution without an independent colonnade and definitely
Of
providing
course, yes.
depictions of Egyptian gorge cornices crowning the top of the entablature. although obviously we always have to be a bit careful about such small size representations on coins and whether they actually reflected the reality in antiquity. But surely we cannot discard them.
No, we cannot discard them, and actually, for now, is the only thing that we have. So it's the only reference that we have. So in this case, I found it useful and to use these representations. And I was not the first actually. Jean Boob was the first to propose this interpretation. I think it has a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. I don't want to monopolize this conversation, but while we wait for other questions, if anyone from our audience has any questions, then I'll just go on. I was also interested really by the final part of your presentations where you were trying to attempt a sort of spatial and visual analysis of how people would have seen the complex of Temple A looking at it from the side of the arch and the other way around. And I think that's really, really interesting because it's one thing to look at something on a plan, and it's another thing to have these reconstructed elevations to try at least and get some sense of what ancient viewers might have perceived in antiquity. I
Yes,
was
of
one,
course.
yeah. I was wondering if, I mean, I know that the archaeological evidence we have is restricted to this part of the monumental district, but was wondering if you have any ideas of how this complex could have been seen and perceived within the broader settlement of Sala. So looking at the spatial relationship between these three terraces and the other natural features of the site.
So not for now. As I said, it is one thing that I would like to explore further, maybe with other reconstructions involving all the Roman buildings, also the other buildings that are around this district. But I find it particularly interesting because architecture is a very strong means of communication in ancient
Sure.
societies. So there must be something that we can find in this architectural language, and I think that it is actually very interesting, and I hope to have some more data and more hypotheses in the future on this topic. For now, it's just a sketch. Let's say
Well,
that.
of course, there is always some speculation. There is a question from Susan Walker, who is wondering about the statues that you mentioned that they were
Mhm.
found in Temple A. So Susan is asking whether the statues were placed in the Chellah at the time of their construction or whether they were brought to the site later, perhaps even in late antiquity.
So we don't know about that. We only know that they were found in layers that Boob dated to the 4th century. So he said that if these statues were in those layers dating to a late phase, they must have been used also in the past. And so he links them to actually to the construction. Yes, I don't know to the construction, but of course to more ancient phases of the temple. But we don't know nothing more about this because he unfortunately didn't publish anything in detail of these excavations. So these are the only things that we know about this.
Yeah, and that is obviously a general problem with the stratigraphy at Sala, the fact that we don't have one single detailed publication of the stratigraphy. We have to rely, as you pointed out several times in your presentation, on a series of, well, essentially preliminary reports that were
Yes.
published at different stages. It does seem to me, however, that the materials that come from this area of the site were quite homogeneous. It is true that probably some of them came from more recent layers, such as late antique layers, but probably even the older materials were not moved around too much. I mean, for instance, we also have evidence of inscriptions coming from this area, which I think we can safely attribute to this area, including some late statues of Constantine that you mentioned, but also some Roman imperial evidence. There is one statue base which was found inside one of the Chellah, which mentions a private intervention uh, recording the restoration of one of the Chellah of the temple and its door. So it is obviously something which was found in situ. So,
Yes.
so I think, yes, we can safely assume that probably those statues did come from within the area. Now, whether the temple was a dynastic temple dedicated to the client kings or not is probably a different and more complicated story, and quite a controversial one on which quite a lot of ink has been spilled. And I'm afraid there is no definitive answer for that. There is also a question from Paul Bennett who says, thank you very much for an excellent, well-illustrated presentation. And I completely agree with Paul, who's wondering if there is a record of the site stratigraphy and whether this is linked to cultural materials in the archive.
No, in the archive we don't have anything. We only have photographs. The only thing that we have relating to stratigraphy are some very short articles by Jean Boub that concern the excavations of this area of the middle terrace of Temple A, but they are actually not so. Um, they don't concern the whole were found in them, and so it is very complicated to reconstruct all the stratigraphy, the actual stratigraphy that he found, and assess it with maybe new data that we have since the 1960s, on the new data and the new studies on material culture that we can have now. So no, unfortunately, we don't have so much to work on.
Yeah, that is a problem indeed, and one that we have to face constantly in our research. So I think unless there are any more questions from the audience, we can probably finish here. But not before thanking you again for such an excellent presentation with many
Yeah.
important points that you raised and many questions that remain open for future research. So we wish you all the best in the continuation of your
Thank
work.
you.
So we're all
Thank you
really
very
looking
much.
forward to future developments. And also, I would like to remind our audience of our next lecture in our Buildness series, which will take place on April the 16th at 5 p.m. UK time. And the lecture will be by Katharina Gruneisel on contested urban fabrics, making markets with second-hand garments in Tunis. So I do look forward to seeing you there. And for tonight, so Thank you again, Rossella,
Thank
and
you. Thank you.
goodbye, everyone.